Hi there tankers and tankettes, this is Iron Lord Ming coming back at you with another World of Tanks console guide. In this episode it's going to be quite a long one, so I do apologise about that, but it's going to be quite comprehensive as well. And in this episode we're going to be looking at all sorts of different things, specifically guns, ammunition, armour, and pretty much how it functions in the game. So start off with, in regards to types of guns you can mount to your vehicles, there's generally about 3 different types of cannon, or cannon type. You have your howitzer. This is something that is usually large caliber, low velocity, usually used at the Sting HE, maybe the occasional heat round. You tend to find it mainly on artillery and the occasional heavy and medium, like I say, the M4, Panzer IV-H, KV-2, those sort of vehicles. The other type of cannon is a autocannon. So an autocannon, not to be confused with an autoloader. An autocannon is pretty much something that's low caliber, usually between anywhere between about 7.62mm up to about 30mm. And with these guns, usually the common trait is they're very low in terms of penetration. They're not going to be useful in fighting things frontally unless at low tier, and they tend to have again 3 ammunition types, much like everything else. They have the AP, APCR, and HE, though the HE is typically useless, so I'd avoid using that at all costs. Again, we're not going to focus too much on auto cannons because you don't really see them past tier 5. The last tank to really have one is the Leopard light tank at tier 5, but in regards to the bread and butter of types of guns in the game, you have obviously the main, anti-tank gun, your high velocity gun. Again, it varies in calibers. It does vary in velocity as well, and different stats, because obviously every different tank has a different type of gun attached. But generally, this is something you're going to be wanting to fire AP out of, possibly APCR at high tiers where it was standard, and you're pretty much going to want to focus on penning to do damage, versus say howitzers where you just mainly want to do damage just by splashing people with HE. So, just as an example, when you've got a armor penetrating sort of gun, when you look at your tank, it's instantly recognizable. It's usually a long barrel sort of type gun, usually, like I say, high velocity, and again, it's pretty much common trait throughout all tiers. So you do get shorter cannons, like the M3 Stuart and stuff like that, which have, again, arm piercing guns, but they're, again, really low caliber. But like I say, not to really focus on those because those are lower tier vehicles, so you're not really going to be in them for long. But you typically start getting your proper anti-tank cannons from around tier 4, where you start getting the 57mm guns, and obviously onwards where you then get 75s, which are quite common throughout the majority of tiers, eventually going into 90mm, 105s, and then eventually 120mm and high calibers. So pretty much just in short, this, in regards to guns, there's usually 4 primary ammo types. There's AP. That's going to be a universal round. It's going to have typically the medium amount of pen for all the rounds available to your vehicle. It also does pretty much your medium average damage, and you can basically want to use that mainly when you're top tier and even +1, or just shooting tanks that you can generally penetrate and do guaranteed damage to. You also have APCR or heat, depending on what tank you're playing. That is going to be your premium round. APCR pretty much works the same as AP, though it has slightly low normalization. We'll get into that in a sec, but tends to have higher velocity and way more penetration as a result. And then you have heat rounds, which work completely differently to AP and APCR. They're only a unique little round, and with heat rounds, typically they don't lose penetration over range like AP and APCR do, but they don't have any normalization, which pretty much means if you're shooting at angled armor, you're pretty much going to be facing the full effective thickness of that armor, unlike AP and APCR, due to heat having a lack of normalization. Now, heat rounds do keep their penetration across all ranges, so it's really handy in that regard. And it's one little neat trick about heat rounds is that they're not actually affected by ricochet mechanics, but again, we'll get into that in a little bit. Your 4th round is typically going to be high explosive. Now, high explosive, again, pretty much available on most things. Usually with high explosive, I'd avoid using it if your gun is a 75mm caliber or lower, just because you're not going to get that much benefit out of using it. It's going to be extremely low penetration, extremely low damage. It's just going to be pretty much worthless. Though, in regards to using HE on 75mm guns, that kind of weighs weighs off of its effectiveness around tier 5. So if you are going to be slinging HE, I would take a look specifically at the type of gun you're using. Russian 85mm guns at mid tiers tend to have good HE, so they're really handy to have, specifically for soft skin vehicles, which is going to be your main target with HE. And again, with higher caliber guns, obviously you're going to have more HE penetration and HE damage. Well, with obviously the good thing about HE being that you don't actually have to penetrate to do damage, so long as your caliber and damage of the gun is high enough that it can affect the armor zone that you're pretty much shooting at. So that's pretty much the gist of it, the basic types that you have. But to go into it in a bit more depth, you may see howitzers such as I'm showing here on the SG-152, the 152mm howitzer, and you may see that I've only got 2 shells loaded, and that's HE and heat. And you may ask, why don't I use AP on that when it is a derp gun that is capable of firing AP? Well, generally speaking, if you are using a howitzer, AP generally not the way to go, because typically, unless you're playing certain vehicles like the Hellcat 105, the Slayer SG-152, the Dreadnought, which are kind of exempt from these rules, AP rounds and howitzers are generally very lackluster. They're very low pen, they're very low velocity, and again, you also have to deal with the bad accuracy of howitzers as well. So yeah, granted, if you do pen, you do pretty much a consistent amount of damage. Usually, say in the case of the KB2, the standard KB2 that is, you tend to do about 700 damage a pen, but you only have about 110mm of base penetration and about 130 with your premium AP. So it's, again, not that great. It's only really going to be good for stomping on same or lower tiers with pretty much no armor, but at which point, given the long reload of the KB2, you're better off slinging full HE just to do that guaranteed amount of damage, because why potentially waste a 15-20 second reload and bounce when you can hit some 400 with HE. Now the Dreadnought, the premium version of the KB2 at tier 7 is like I say, exempt from that rule. Same with the Hellcat 105 and the Slayer SG-152, because that actually has a really good AP round. Still low velocity, but it actually has penetration at about 175mm, which is good enough to go through pretty much everything, same tier and 1 tier above, and obviously go through flanks of even tier 9 heavy. So that's something to keep in mind. But yeah, that's pretty much ammo in a nutshell. Now, specifically in regards to how AP and APCR work, and well, heat as well. So AP rounds, like I say, they're like going to be your general purpose rounds on most things. Like I say, avoid using them on derp guns, especially the German 105s, because just beyond 64mm of pen on the German 105mm howitzers against even like Saint Team mediums, or God forbid you're facing +2, pretty much useless. But in regards to AP in general on like your standard guns, AP is going to be like a universal round with an average penetration, average damage, and it also has something called normalization. Now, what normalization is, it's pretty much a mechanic in the game which reduces the amount of effective armor that you're shooting at. So say you're fighting a T-34, and you've got the 75mm on the Panzer IV. In this case, in this clip, I'm using a derp gun, but bear with me. But if you're using a 75mm gun, that gun with AP has about 110mm of average penetration, and with it being an AP round, it also has 5 degrees of normalization, which basically means if you're shooting at T-34, which has 45mm of armor, but it is sloped at 55 degrees, which makes it about 80ish to 90ish millimeters effective, which you're going to pen anyway because you have enough to go through. But with that 5 degrees of normalization, you're pretty much reducing the effective angling by 5 degrees. So you make it thinner, effectively, because your shell hits and it sort of normalizes to the armor and corrects the angle by 5 degrees, and that pretty much makes it easy to go through. APCR is the same sort of deal, but it's only got 3 degrees of normalization, so if you are shooting sloped armor, it's going to be a bit tougher to get through. But again, with APCR generally having higher velocities and way higher penetration, again, that's no biggie. Though you do need to be aware if you are using APCR rounds, unlike AP, their penetration drop off of a range is far more severe. So there's something to keep in mind. You don't really want to be sniping with APCR outside of 500 to 600 meters, unless of course you're playing a high tier medium or high tier heavy, or which has APCR standards anyway with insane amount of pen. So that's just something to consider. Now, in regards to HE and heat, HE and heat don't have normalization, but both rounds keep their penetration across ranges. HE generally relies on splash damage in order to inflict damage on enemies, because what it will basically, if you do fire a HE round, assuming your caliber is high enough, like I say, I would really recommend running HE on average on 105mm guns or high caliber just to get better results. Though, like I say, you know, the results of that do kind of lose effectiveness as you go up the tiers, so keep that in mind. But if you're using HE, you're pretty much set with base penetration, and that's what you get. So if you hit something and you're able to pen it, good for you, you're going to do full damage. But if not, with the way HE works, with having splash, what will pretty much happen is you'll hit the armor, the game will pretty much do a calculation of, you know, okay, bear in mind where you hit. If you hit a thinner plate, or say, you know, if you used to be a common tactic to splash underneath tanks with HE to inflict damage, it will pretty much calculate the damage result and say, okay, if you hit this like thin piece of roof armor, you're not going to fully penetrate, because it wasn't, like, again, you know, it wasn't a direct fire shot with an incorrect splash, and then it will say, okay, you've done 150 damage. That's just an example. Again, it does vary depending on what sort of gun you're using. Higher caliber guns will do more damage, thinner armored targets will pretty much allow you to full pen and mess them up. And then you have heat. Now, heat doesn't have normalization, so pretty much when you're shooting a sloped armor, it's going to be as thick as it possibly can be. Now, with that in mind, it's not actually that bad a thing, because okay, granted, it's going to be less effective against sloped armor, but at the same time, it's also more effective against sloped armor. Now, that's going to probably make no sense to you, first of all, which I completely understand, but when you consider it, heat rounds are, unlike AP and HCR, are not affected by ricochets. Same with HE. HE would pretty much, like, even if it's an auto ricochet angle, or just hit and splash and do some sort of damage anyway, assuming the caliber's high, like I say. Heat, unlike AP and HCR rounds, which will also bounce if you hit armor that is 70 degrees or, again, 70 degrees sloping or more, heat will pretty much ignore that. But, like I say, the armor itself is going to be a lot thicker to deal with. So, say for example, you've got something like a Chieftain. Now, Chieftain it's not got the best armor, it's about 85mm, but the very upper part of the upper plate is extremely well sloped. So if it's a hull down Chieftain and it's showing only a tiny bit of that hull, and it's the strongest part of it where it's that 70-degree slope, AP and HCR rounds are pretty much going to auto bounce. But if you're firing heat, assuming you've got at least 200-ish, 250-ish millimeters of pen, you can go right through. No biggie. And yeah, so that's pretty much covers heat rounds. And like I say, you know, you don't lose penetration or range. And when it comes to HE as well, going back to HE and derp guns, depending on the derp gun you're using, what you can actually find is that, as I'm going to show in this clip here, in the Churchill 7, if you actually, you know, auto aim on someone, but you don't have direct line of fire, sometimes you can actually kind of like cosplay artillery in a way, and pretty much loop your shells over objects into targets, and, you know, pretty much like splash their top deck armor where it's going to be finished. So you can see here I'm in Churchill 7. I've not got direct line of fire on this lurvy. Again, this is an old clip from about pre-5, I think it's just about before 5.0, and I'm pretty much just like RBing him, auto locking onto him, because I haven't got, like, again, direct line of sight, but because of the trajectory of the 3.7-inch howitzer that the Churchill 7 has, which is, again, very low velocity howitzer as well, so it's even better for this sort of thing. I was able to loop shells and just do, you know, 100-ish damage here and there. Now, with HE, in terms of all the sort of you know, ammo types, HE will typically do the most damage on a full pen, but you're never really going to reliably full pen, so there's always that to keep in mind. But the interesting thing about HE is, even though it does the most damage, generally speaking, there are actually a few exceptions to that rule. So specifically, I can think of 2 examples off the top of my head: the Becky Lynch, which I showed earlier, and the Undertaker or the M48A2 and Senlac, respectively. So pretty much the Senlac and the Becky Lynch at the same time, just one's unskinned, one is skinned, one isn't skinned. Same with the M48A2. one skinned for the WWE event that happened, and one isn't skinned. Now, the M48A2, that HE round on that actually has about half the damage, or actually 75% of the damage of the AP round, which is quite unusual. But the reason it has that is because it actually has more penetration. So it has, I believe, 130, 160-ish penetration, if on top of my head, because it's technically an armor piercing HE shell. It's a unique shell in the game, and what that basically means is if you use that HE and you pen a target, yeah, you're not doing that much damage, and you are using DPM theoretically, but you're actually, because of the way that shell works and it's got a unique characteristic, it actually does way more critical damage. So if you were to say, you know, say you're fighting something like an AMX CDC, someone with no armor, you're pretty much sacrificing effectively 80 damage a shot, but every time you hit it, you're killing a gunner, you're killing crew members, you're ruining modules, and he's just not having a good day, especially, you know. And the same goes for anything with like no armor that you can really reliably pen with those rounds. And the Becky Lynch is the same deal, but the Becky Lynch is even weirder. With the Becky Lynch or the Senlac, that has pretty much a 40mm auto cannon when you switch to HE, where you reload pretty much in every second. You have about 50-ish pens, so it's not that great, but again, if you're fighting soft skin targets, you know, my favourite target to shoot at in the Becky Lynch and Senlac was like, you know, stuff like SG-130 PM, stuff pretty much no armor at all. And if you're hitting them every like 1 and a bit seconds, and you got increased critical damage on your HE, it's insanely potent. Yeah, your base damage is only about 70 to 85 damage, which isn't a lot. But you're hitting them every few seconds, you're running modules, you're going to cause them to get ammo rash, you're going to set them on fire, you're going to mess them up wholesale. And that's kind of the main goal of HE. Like, you always want to keep a couple of HE rounds, even if you are using lower caliber guns like 75mm at like say tier 7 or such. Just because, again, if you're fighting those soft skinned vehicles like you know, the Rheinmetall Ballistics, SG-130 PMs, that sort of thing, you can actually load the HE, and assuming you hit where you know, where you want to hit it, you hit like the turret that fits part of the armor and you pen, you're pretty much increasing your DPM on average by 50%, and you're ruining your modules. So always keep a couple HE rounds just for situational use. Again, don't rely on them. They're not going to be 100% foolproof unless, of course, you're using 152mm derp, you know, something like a KV2, where then if you're playing the KV2 run full HE, unless it's the Dreadnought where you want to keep a mix of both AP, heat, and HE, because, well, the Dreadnought is just a disgusting vehicle with insane AP penetration for what it is, and heat rounds which can pretty much say, well, you have armor, not anymore, basically, even to something like an E75, which is 2 tiers higher. So that's coming through mind well. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Now, going over to the third thing. So I've mentioned ricochet mechanics, I've mentioned how HE works, I've mentioned normalization, but one thing I haven't mentioned is something called overmatching. Now, overmatching is very important because, especially for dealing with certain vehicles, specifically, you know, stuff like, say, the Swedish tank destroyers, the S1s, the UDES, that sort of thing. Now, with the way the armor profile is designed on stuff like the UDES, the S1, if you're shooting at it, it's pretty much always going to be sloped at 70 degrees. So if you're firing at AP, or, you know, even APCR, you're pretty much not always going to pen unless you hit, say, the polar or the flattest part of the armor. Now, for the UDES, it's not too much of a concern because the UDES only has 20mm of armor. Now, what that basically means is because it's got 20mm of armor, anything with a 61mm or higher caliber gun will pretty much overmatch it because of something called the free caliber rule. So which pretty much means if you're shooting at someone with an AP or APCR round and your caliber is 3 times greater than the armor that you're hitting despite the angling, you pretty much auto-penetrate. You literally go right through, ruin a day, and mess them up, like say wholesale. Same rule applies with the Sturv S1. Sturv S1 is the tier 8 premium. Pretty much competes with the UDES. UDES being the tech tree tank and the S1 being the premium. The S1 has 30mm of armor. Now, for some vehicles, specifically say something like the Centurion, which doesn't have a 90mm gun, it actually has an 83mm-ish gun. With that, you can't auto-pen the S1. So you either have to hit the cupola, hit the flat part of the armor, you know, when they're not, you know, angled properly. Or alternatively, what you can also do is you can shoot HE, because again, something to consider. Your HE is going to have about 40, 50-ish millimeters of pen. In fact, I'm just going to fact check that because I'm not sure myself. I haven't played Century in a long time. But what you can do if you say don't have that, you know, that gun that's able to overmatch, like say you're running a, say you're fighting an S1 and a Sherman that's tier 6, unless you're sniping that cupola out, you're not really going to do a lot to it. But your HE has 38mm of pen. You're only shooting a 30mm plate. Yeah, you're not going to full penetrate because of, again, the way it's sloped angled, but you're still going to mess it up because you still have more penetration than what the armor is actually valued at. So you're still going to splash it probably for about 100-ish damage a shot, maybe about 80-ish damage. It's not going to be a lot, it's not going to be significant, but in those sort of situations where maybe you can't hit the cupola, it's really handy to have. So yeah, if we just double check for you guys, and again, I hope you enjoyed the 75 gameplay in the background. It's an ace game, by the way. But yeah, if we take a quick peek. So yeah, Centurion, here we go. So yeah, with the 20 pounder, assume you're using that, you have with the HE 42mm penetration with 280 alpha, so you pretty much be able to mess it up if you can't snipe the cupola. So you see there, you know, 2 kills, 4,700 damage, I believe, in the 75, you know, which is pretty much going ham, because the 70, like I say, is a very, very, very potent vehicle. And the same sort of applies in regards to overmatching to the other TDs as well, the tier 9 and 10. With the tier 9, if you got 120mm gun or higher in caliber, so specifically looking at 122s, you're pretty much going to auto penetrate that. And with the tier 10, well, the tier 10's got 15mm armor zones, so again with that, you're actually going to need 151mm caliber or higher gun in order to auto penetrate. Now, like I said, it's not too bad because at tier 10, pretty much most things use heat as their premium shell, and like I say, that heat shell can negate that angling and, like I say, go right through it effectively, as long as you've got enough base pen. So yeah, I'm just going to pretty much just show you a quick, you know, pretty much what I'm on about here. So first example I'm going to show you is pretty much, I believe the IS3. I'll just make sure. There we are. So yeah, I'm just going to the tech tree. I'm going to show you the IS3 now. So why do I mention the IS3? Because you think, well, it's a tough Soviet heavy tank. You know, it's an absolute bulldozer at tier 8. Well, the thing with it is it has a very, very unique weak spot. It's actually shared by a few other Soviet tanks. I believe the IS-4 currently still has that same weak spot as well, where on the top of the tank you'll see pretty much what's known as the loader's hatch. So, well, pretty much if you hit that zone, it's only 20mm thick. So if you're using effectively a 61mm of caliber gun or higher, so pretty much any 75mm gun in the game, you can overmatch it with ease. Like, as long as you make contact with that plate with an AP or an APCL round, which, while it is quite a small target, is easily done because you've got like quite a large surface area to land on. You're pretty much auto penning it. And better yet, if you're one of those people who like to run, 105 derp guns, say on like your Jumbo E2 as an example, I know I used to do it. If you hit that top plate with, say, some HE, because it's only 20mm of armor, you're pretty much going to splash through and do a crazy amount of damage. Now, there's also quite a few other tanks that are notorious for being overmatched. The AMX-50s, a good example, the AMX-50 100 through to 50B, because the side armor is only 35mm. Pretty much, if you've got, like I say, I believe, I'll do quick math in my head, 90, 95, but pretty much 105mm or higher caliber gun, you're going right through, basically. You just auto pen it, and the Foshes used to have the same weak spot before the sidearm was buffed. Pretty much affects all the AMX-50s, is why, probably partially the reason why Wargaming switched them from heavies to medium tanks, because they weren't really heavy tanks. And like another example as well of that overmatch mechanic is the like as I said, the Swedish TDs I mentioned earlier. So just showing you off the armor model here. But yeah, then like many other examples like the FE215B, both Death Star and the heavy tank, because the standard FE215B has 50-ish millimeters of side armor below the tracks, which pretty much means if you're fighting it with anything with 152.4mm gun or higher, i.e. the 60 TP, the E4s, E5s, that sort of thing, you can pretty much auto-pen that zone. And it's even worse for the Death Star, because the entire side arm of the Death Star is like 50mm. There's no like 100mm plate or anything like that. So again, something to keep in mind. Now, there's one difficult-ish part when it comes to overmatch mechanics and the need to use heat rounds, etc., and that is looking at the Swedish top tier mediums. Now, the Swedish top tier mediums, specifically the tier 10, tier 8 doesn't really have that much turret armor, so you can easily deal with that. The tier 9 is only a marginal improvement, and like I say, anything I believe with about 122 or higher caliber gun, you can overmatch that. But with the tier 10 actually has 100mm of turret armor, which you may think, well, at tier 10 that's not a lot, but because of the 70-degree sloping, it pretty much means you need a 301mm or high caliber gun to automatically pen it with an AP or APSR shell. Problem is, those sort of guns don't exist in the game. Even artillery has a gun no higher than a 240mm gun. So how do you deal with stuff like the Swedish tier 10, when it's hold down? Well, the best bet is, like I say, to load heat rounds, because as I mentioned, heat rounds don't abide by the 70-degree rule, but you need an insane amount of penetration, so it's pretty much only going to work on those top tier tank destroyers, which is a little bit unfortunate, but is what it is. But alternatively, like I say, you can take advantage of HU shells, just to whittle it down over time and just harass it, basically get them out of those positions. Or you can also wait till they maybe push a bit further ahead than they should, and you pen the hull, or wait till they turn the side of the turret and you can overmatch side of the turret with ease. So yeah, that's pretty much it. So that pretty much covers overmatching. I've covered obviously ricochets, and I've covered basically how you want to use certain ammunition. So yeah, that's pretty much the majority of it. Well, there are other things as well to consider, and that is obviously armor itself, and how that works, because there are like a few different types of armor that you can you pretty much see around. So not only do you, like say, you get the extremely well sloped armor that, like say, means you have to know about overmatch mechanics, you have to know about normalization, you have to know about how heat pretty much ignores the 70-degree rule in order to counter it. But you also have other types of armor in the game. So you have like spaced armor as well. Not really got any footage lined up right now for space armor, but I'm just going to talk about it briefly. So when you're dealing with space armor, because it'd be pretty much a bit of armor just in front of the front hull or sides, that will pretty much give you some extra protection. So with that in mind, with spaced armor, key thing to note: if you're shooting HE at spaced armor, say the little side panels on the I3, the front hull upper plate of, say, something like the Thunderbolts or the Thunderbolt shim, sorry, or the Super Pershing, or even the knee dozer blades for the ROM M48 pattern, the engineering pattern. That's the tier 8 German premium. If you're shooting HE at that, it's not going to be effective at all, because the way spaced armor works is if you hit it with, say, anything that's like a chemical shell like HE or heat, if you hit it with HE, it will pretty much pre-detonate and you'll have no splash. You'll pretty much do nothing to it. It'll be entirely useless. You can still get away with it if the plates are close enough together, or you can hit a part of the armor, but the splash will hit some random odd part of the zone, like maybe the tracks, and just go for the sides of the hull. But again, you're still not going to be doing that much damage. Additionally, if you shoot heat, if you shoot heat rounds as spaced armor will completely absorb heat rounds. So yeah, if you see a sign scraping I7, and you think, oh, I might be able to penetrate. No, you can't. You won't be able to penetrate heat at all. Even if you have a flat sidearm shot, your best bet, if you are firing heat, of course, is to try and aim for, in between the tracks, where there's no spaced armor there, because again, tracks also are something that count as spaced armor. So that's also something else to consider. Now, generally speaking, as well, so alongside all that, you can also now that's just pretty much all talking about the offensive side of things. When to use HE, when to use AP, when to use heat. The types of things that you're going to run into, which will basically prevent you from being effective with those things. Now, on the opposite end of the spectrum, on the defensive side of things, there are a number of things you can do to reduce the amount of damage you take, or just generally, even in some cases, make yourself invulnerable. Now, it's not necessarily true, because there's always going to be something that can hurt you in water tanks, whether it be artillery, whether it be a tank destroyer, whether it be something else. But there's a few things you can actually do if you are, say, playing a heavy tank, medium, anything like that, to increase your armor effectiveness. First of all, as I mentioned earlier, it's something called side scraping. Now, what side scraping is basically doing is you're pretty much taking your tank, you're pulling up to like a rock or piece of hard cover, something that can't be shot through, and you're pretty much angling out, usually at a slight angle, so anywhere between typically is about 30 to 45 degrees, depending on the vehicle. In some cases it's detrimental to over-angle your armor, because even though, like say I mentioned the 3 caliber bolt earlier, in certain guns you can still partially overmatch some tanks, which can basically lead to not so much an auto pen, but a good chance to pen if their base penetration is high enough, and regardless of the angle. Though that's something that you tend to only really see when you're fighting things like British tanks, though it's not as bad as it used to be, but it's still kind of a thing. And obviously, anything pretty much like very weak or null side armor. So say something like a Panzer IV as an example. Even though it's got the shirts and the side skirts, which are about 5 to 10 millimeters, it's still not enough to really prevent anyone from penning right through your vehicle if they're firing, say, AP or PCR. Of course, if they're firing HE, the HE will pre-detonate. If they're firing heat, it will just get absorbed and be ineffective. So basically, side scraping, pretty much you pull the tank up to a piece of hard cover, something like that, and angle out about 25 to 40 degrees at most, depending on how good your side armor is. And so if you're in something like an IS-4, then it's actually recommended you over angle because the side armor is so thick. But if you're in something like Tiger 1, where it's decent at side scraping, but it's not recommended to side scrape, because again, with that you just don't have the overall armor to really protect you. But you can still side scrape and be somewhat efficient, effective versus someone who doesn't really know too much about the game and what they're doing. Though in regards to that, just obviously make sure you don't over-angle, and just keep it so that you're pretty much the only thing they can really see of you is your front turret or your side armor. But side armor is at such a strong angle that they can't pen you. Now, not every tank can side scrape traditionally. There are actually a lot of vehicles that have to do something called reverse side scraping, which is pretty much the same thing, but instead of using your frontal armor, you use your rear armor. So good examples of that, something like the KV-5, because the front the front radar operator's hatch shoots bogs. TOG 2, because the rear armor is actually sloped better than the frontal armor. Even if it's thinner, if you are reverse side scraping, it doesn't matter, because they're just going to see your side armor, which is 75mm at a ridiculous angle, and nothing's really going to pen you. Other vehicles that are really decent reverse side scraping, pretty much any of the Soviet pike nose heavies, such as the T-10, the IS-3, the IS-7. Reason for that is because then with pike nose, if you are trying to side scrape in front of you, you're making yourself automatically vulnerable, because the second you angle that plate and it flattens out, it's an easy pen. So those tanks are usually very good reverse side scrapers, because of how far forward the turret is, how good the side armor is, as well as mentioned with the spaced armor earlier on. You can reverse side scrape and, like I say, be pretty much invulnerable unless you get hit by artillery or something flanks you or anything along those lines. So that's something that you definitely do. Other things you can do, just try to minimize your profile as much as possible. Go hold down, that sort of thing. Obviously, make sure that if they haven't got a good line of sight, or you have a small like pixel target here, again, it's just better for you. You can have a better time. And on top of that as well, so other than what I've already mentioned, there are a few other things as well that you can sort of employ. So you can sort of pretty much slightly over angle your tracks in some cases, even if you're in like a lightly armored medium, because sometimes you can bait a shot or just go in your tracks and it result damage. Yeah, you might get mobilized, but it's usually better than taking 400 alpha to the face. So that's something that you can definitely do. Other things you can do as well is so other than over angling your track, other than side scraping, and other than go and hold down, just like say, try and minimize your profile as much as possible, and just keep an eye on like when the enemy's last fired, and based on that, then choose whether or not you want to trade with them and do that sort of thing. Also, it's just a general tip. This isn't really related to defensive or offensive capabilities for armor and ammo, but this general tip for myself: if you are shooting at anything and you've got a decent side profile, always shoot the front or rear drive wheel. 9 times out of 10, at least anyway. Because if you can do that, you can usually pen through the tracks and mobilize target at the same time, which pretty much means if you're one of those people that like to go for marks, or you want to start going for marks, very good thing to do, because you can pretty much rack up a silly amount of distance doing that, and it's fairly beneficial. But yeah, other than that, I think that pretty much covers the majority of it. Well, pretty much at least everything I wanted to cover. You can also angle as well, so just if you're in like a sort of boxy-ish tank, or a tank with like a decent flat slope frontally, good side on it, just pretty much angle your tank about 45 degrees. That usually helps a lot, as preventing damage. May not always work, but usually as a last resort it can be quite efficient. But other than that though, well, like I say, that seems to be pretty much it. Other than a few last tidbits in regards to things, basically in regard to other premium ammo types, because again it isn't just HE, APCR, and a heat, which are premium ammo. You also do have a premium HE, which is usually found quite commonly on artillery typically, where premium HE will pretty much usually have either slightly bit more pen or a bit more splash, so that way you have a big splash radius, you increasing your damage over a larger range. Other vehicles that have a premium premium HE is a premium tend to be stuff like the T-49 Sheridan, that sort of thing. Basically those sort of derpy vehicles, also including the Merc tanks like the Turtle and the Duck, I believe it's Duck. I'm not too certain, I can't think of the name off the top of my head. But yeah, those sort of vehicles as well. They're premium HE, so it's pretty much normal HE, paying like double by 2 will be more splash radius out of it, and as a result, generally, you're probably going to be doing more damage as a result. Other types of premium ammo, HESH. Again, HESH is another. As far as it works with water tanks, because it's like water tanks, it's not realistic, it's not slim or anything, it's very arcadey. HESH pretty much in water tanks works like HE, but with a ridiculous amount of pen. So say if I shot someone with HESH, say Death Star, granted now even after they nerfed it, you still got about 240 millimeters of penetration with the HESH, because like I say, it's basically a HE with a flat level of penetration, so it's really good if you want to just mess things up, or you're in a situation where you can actually utilize that. Additionally, other than premium APCR, you also have premium armor piercing. Now premium armor piercing, well, how would I best describe it? Well, if you do have premium armor piercing available, it's generally not the best in terms of penetration. I typically find it on a lot of lower tier British vehicles like the Grizzly, the M3 Grant, that sort of thing, using the 7.5s or 7.6s. But with the actual, premium AP itself, I mean, it's pretty much just normal AP with more penetration, so you still get benefits of normalization, which can help out quite a bit in some cases. But again, it's not really something to be relied on. And well, generally, especially if you look at the higher tiers and specifically the Imperial Japanese sort of tanks, like the heavies, like the Type 4, Type 5, the Chiri at tier 7, that sort of thing. I would generally prefer to have either a really good APCR round or a really good heat round with way more penetration, just so that at least I know, I can rely on it. Where 289 pen in the case of the Type 4 and the 140 isn't bad, and I definitely would prefer that over using the derp gun on Type 4 and Type 5 because the derp guns aren't terrible. Yeah, you don't really have to aim; you can just use HE, but the DPM is like it's terrible. So I would personally avoid that. It's just me. I'd rather pen and do more damage, do damage more consistently, should I say? So 289 pen, you can go for most things with it. But you will struggle, especially against stuff like Pan 7s and stuff like that, which may be like front onto you, where you can only really pen the low plate, and the low plate is about 301 to 310 millimeters thick, and that's before you get into, well, in terms of the effective thickness and everything, because it's already a thick plate, and then because sloping age becomes even thicker, so yeah, that's definitely a concern. But yeah, the Premium AP is pretty bog standard, nothing really else to talk about there. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Like I say, that's pretty much the gist of it. Well, in the meantime, anyway, I'm gonna leave you with the rest of this gameplay. What's left. Hope you enjoy. And at the same time as well, thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the vid. Hope you found it useful. Granted, if you're a pro experienced player, you probably know all this stuff already, so I do apologise. But if there's more targeted towards new players, people that maybe want to get the grips of the game, you understand why maybe their shells aren't working as intended when, well, maybe they just had the wrong shell loaded or firing at Spaced Army and that sort of thing. So yeah, like I say. Hope you enjoyed. At the same time as well, I hope to see you on the next one when I get around to it. And well, at the same time as well, if you enjoy what I think is console content, checking down the description, I'll have some links for you, so whatever content creators that you might enjoy watching, plus a link to the community Discord, so you can have a chat with people like myself, people like RenegadeCentral, people like LuckyStarPie, and just engage with the community and have a fun time. So well, other than that, thank you very much for watching, and well, enjoy.